Hello dear viewer, here it is time for the third part of our story. I hope you've already subscribed by clicking the bell so you don't miss new parts or new stories. In this part, there are unexpected discoveries from which you may enjoy the story and of course have fun watching it. Dig 2 Graves. Chapter 3. Sunday, 10:31 p.m. Unable to stand the cold, I step out onto the balcony of my hotel room with bottled water from the mini fridge. After a shower, I finally had time to do what I do best, which is to think. What planet did my plane land on 2 days ago? I wonder. And as I think back over the past 50 hours, several things become apparent to me, and one of them is that I have no idea what's going on. The dilemma continued early yesterday morning, when 2 uniformed police officers showed up shortly after my conversation with the doctor. After a few questions from them, I was for a moment close to coming clean and naming names, when my conservative nature screamed at me to keep my mouth shut. If Susie is decisive almost to the point of impulsiveness, I am decidedly analytical and contemplative. Susie's quick actions serve her well in a volatile courtroom, and because she is usually on point, she manages to seize the moment and uncover the truth. I'm almost the opposite of my character, as I dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Susie rushes headlong into the battlefield to fight the enemy. I prefer to tiptoe and sneak up on them from behind. No, I think to myself. Talking to the police was clearly not the best decision. I sure as hell don't want the rumors of what happened Friday night to get out, unless that bastard Schmidt is behind it. It's bad enough what they said about me at the hospital, but they could only assume what happened, and that Susie was somehow involved. No, I definitely don't want it to be known, and if I laid it all out to the police, I'd lose all capricious self-control. With a heavy sigh, I think about the possibility that Susie might be involved in all of this. Given Schmidt's involvement, I'm sure there was some coercion involved. We can only hope that Susie may have been under a great deal of stress. But if I've seen her ruthless nature before, I've never seen her as angry as she was on Friday night. She was so angry she didn't even look like herself. There's more behind all this than the alleged cheating on my part, and I'm sure it's Schmidt. He's the real enemy here. Susie's just a random victim like me, isn't she? But what if she's not a victim? What if Susie's deeply involved in all this crap? If she is, I don't see a way back. And if Susie is involved, then my decision not to talk to the police is even more right. Her ties to the police as an ADA could make the situation even worse than it already is. I remember again my interview with the police when I was in the hospital. What started out as a friendly questioning turned into an interrogation, as my answers were not specific. I'm sure they didn't believe me when I claimed that I really didn't remember anything from the moment I boarded the car at the airport to waking up in the hospital. But the final question about who I should contact to inform them of my situation did concern them. I suddenly realized that I had no one I wanted them to contact. Being an only child, I had no choice but to call my parents in the evening, and that was very difficult. I had been somewhat estranged from my father for many more years than I would like to admit. The only truly good relationship I had was with my mother, but apparently that's no longer the case. The only person I would turn to is Susie, the very person I'm least inclined to turn to right now. Susie has a similar situation. She's an only child. I know from our conversations that her father left the family when Susie was a teenager, and Susie has no relationship with her mother at all. The only time I met her mother was at our wedding. On top of that, I realized that I don't know who can be my friends and who can't. I know Susie had already told her side of the story to my parents. Who else has she talked to? There are a lot more questions than answers right now, at least for me. Monday, 7:57 a.m. Jake, I don't know how to say this, Tom says as he closes the door to my office. I lean back in my chair and look at Tom Weston, the firm's managing partner and a longtime friend. I gesture with my hand, inviting Tom to take any of the seats in front of my desk. Unfortunately, we don't have time. Protocol says you shouldn't have been allowed in the office in the first place, Tom adds, barely making eye contact with me. At least tell me what this is about, I ask. Given the events of the past few days, I'm already guessing. An emergency human resources review meeting was called yesterday to discuss some recent allegations regarding your behavior and actions. There will be a formal interview with you at 8 a.m. this morning. This morning? I huffed in surprise. Yes. And you held a staff appraisal meeting on Sunday? Jake, this is serious business. This meeting was called by Human Resources, given your high management status in the firm. I'm here as the managing partner of this firm, but I'm also here as a friend. You're in deep shit, Jake, and you have some serious decisions to make in a very short period of time. Where's the meeting? I grumble, rising from my seat. Jake, I'm warning you as your friend. Don't lose your mind. Come on, the meeting is in the executive conference room. Tom leads me out of the office and into the conference room. I look at the clock and see that it's 8 a.m. and Heidi isn't at her desk. If there's one thing Heidi knows how to do, it's be punctual. I expected her to be gone today, but that doesn't lessen my need to talk to her. Who will be attending the review meeting? I ask. Me and Hinckley, of course. I had to appoint Evans as your deputy. Rolansky and Schmidt are the other two. Schmidt, exploded I. Tom flinches, casts a brief glance at me, and then averts his eyes. I know you don't like him, but you know how this procedure works. Heck, you practically wrote the HR review process. I don't like it any more than you do. I know this like the back of my hand, I think to myself. I quickly mentally review that we're talking about 5 managers and above. 3 of them are standing their ground. The first is the managing partner, which is Tom. The second is the executive human resources manager, which is Hinckley. The third is the general counsel position, which until this morning was held by me. The other 2 positions are appointed on a case-by-case basis. One is appointed by the human resources manager, and the other is appointed by the managing partner. I assume you've assigned Rolansky? I'll pretend I didn't hear that so we can stay friends, he replies. Tom reaches out his hand and stops me. You know I shouldn't tell you, but I can't let you go in there completely unarmed. You'll be offered a severance package to resign. The group as a whole decided that the best thing for the firm was to avoid unnecessary lawsuits and publicity. The best way to accomplish this was to resign. There was nothing I could do to stop this story, Jake. All I could do was make the severance package as palatable as they would let me. I lean my back against the wall. I feel numb. I can't believe this is all happening. How did everything go so wrong so fast? I think to myself. Jake, are you okay? Asked Tom, concerned. No, Tom. Just give me a few minutes. You're going to have to be on your guard, Jake. I'm aware of that, Tom. Thank you. Give me a minute to come to my equilibrium. That sounded a lot sharper than I intended. I look at Tom, and he's smiling. When all is said and done, Jake, I hope we remain as close friends. Don't worry about it, Tom. All right, let's go. Tom leads me around the corner and stops for a moment in front of the door to the conference room. He takes one last look at me, then opens the door. I followed Tom in and saw that all 4 of them were sitting together on the opposite side of the table. Tom took his seat at the head of the table, leaving the only empty chairs on my side. I take the middle chair directly across from Christy. I look at her, and for a moment our gazes meet before she drops her gaze to her hands folded on the table. I have great admiration and respect for her. I hired her directly from UT myself. I didn't even consider a candidate from an Eastern school. I wanted someone familiar with the culture and independent lifestyle of Texas. I developed her as a pet project, but honestly, she didn't need much pruning. I know her as a damn interesting colleague, and now, sitting on the other side of the table, a formidable opponent. Mr. Vickers, Hinckley began the review meeting. You were invited here as a participant in an executive review meeting. Yesterday was an interview where the 5 of us reviewed allegations of inappropriate behavior and sexual harassment. These are serious allegations that are against company policy. You can be fired for these offenses. I'm sorry to interrupt you, I cut in, unapologetically, but I want him out of this meeting. I point directly at Schmidt, sitting next to Hinckley. Mr. Vickers, I'm afraid you don't have the opportunity to participate in the formation of this group. You're right, I don't have the information. What I do have is a situation where there is a known animosity between Schmidt and me. Everyone in this room is aware of that. Should the situation escalate into a wrongful termination lawsuit, you will greatly strengthen my position by putting a man who is known to be biased in his place. Immediately after I uttered the magic phrase, wrongful termination suit, there was an awkward silence in the room. I make an effort to look at each of the panelists, except for Schmidt. Miss Hinckley, Schmidt said, I will step aside if the commission prefers someone else. But I am on record as saying that while Vickers and I are not the best of friends, I believe the word feud is too strong a word. I also know that I can serve on this commission without any perceived bias. Is there anyone who thinks Mr. Schmidt would be biased in his role on this commission? Asks Hinckley openly. I look across the table at Christy. This time her expression is impassive, and she fixes her gaze on me. This time she doesn't flinch, and I finally look away. She knows as well as I do that Schmidt can't be impartial. She's learned her lessons too well, I think to myself. I can't read her facial expression at all. Then, if no one believes Mr. Schmidt will be biased, I don't believe it. I know it, I interrupt, glaring venomously at Schmidt. It has already been established that you had nothing to do with the composition of the vetting committee. Fine, I reply. You may be planning my funeral right now, but rest assured, you've just dug your 5th shovelful of dirt on this firm's own grave. 5th? Asks Rolansky. I glanced at Rolansky, wondering why Tom had appointed him to the commission. As far as I knew, he'd only been involved in audits in his own department. He certainly wasn't involved in anything so high up the management chain. Don't encourage it, Hinckley warns. I want to know why he thinks it's the 5th shovel. What were the first 4? Insists Rolansky. Did you have an official interview meeting yesterday? I ask Christie, knowing I'll get a straight answer. Yes, she replied. I looked at Rolansky. There you go. You shoveled the first 4 handfuls of dirt yesterday when you held a formal interrogation session without me. I have the right to examine the evidence. I have the right to challenge my accusers. You took those rights away from me. Jake, you know as well as I do that this is a company, and the Bill of Rights doesn't apply to corporations. It's not a criminal offense, Christie says, but I have rights as stated in the employment contract that each of us signed. And that employment contract says that I have the right to be present at the interview. I have the right to hear what I'm being accused of, and I have the right to respond both orally to the interview panel and in writing. The executive HR review procedure does not state that attendance at the interview is a prerequisite, she objects. Is it too difficult to conduct an interview without the interview subject present? Furthermore, the general model of personnel discipline provides that I have the right to see and respond to any allegations. I am both a supervisor and an employee. I contend that both policies are applicable. If you read the policies, you will see that there are no conflicting clauses. I, for one, have made sure of that, and it will be interesting to see how a civil court looks at that. Jake, Tom cut in. All this talk of courts and lawsuits is giving me an ulcer. The purpose of this meeting is to offer you a severance package. It's a very attractive offer, considering the circumstances, if I do say so myself. Did I get fired? I asked Tom bluntly. Tom looks at Christie. Out of the corner of my eye, I see her shake her head. No, he replies. Let's see the offer, I reply. Hinckley holds out a briefcase to me across the table. I look at the outside of the briefcase, then take it with both hands. I will give the matter serious consideration and get back to you by the end of the week. The commissioners exchange a sudden glance. We want you to familiarize yourself with the severance package and make your decision now. I sit stunned. Tom warned me that I had to be alert and that I would have to make important decisions quickly. Let me understand, I begin, trying to stall for time. You want me to consider this offer now and make a decision immediately? Yes, Hinckley replies. I can't do that, I reply simply. Then we're withdrawing the severance pay? She replies. Not so fast, Tom cut in again. Jake, I realize this is probably coming at you like a hurricane, but what if you go back to your office and go over the proposal, and then meet with us at noon and let us know your decision? Mr. Weston, Hinckley interrupted. That's not what we decided yesterday. Tom's penetrating glance in Hinckley's direction silences her half-heartedly. Tom, I reply, I appreciate the extra time, but there just isn't enough of it. How much time do you want, Jake? I told you, at least until the end of the week. We can't give that much time, begins Hinckley. Tom, I haven't had a chance to look at those numbers. I haven't had an opportunity to review the allegations that have been made against me. I have not had the opportunity to prepare any response. You mean you haven't seen the affidavit or the photographs? Christie suddenly sputtered out. I look back at her. I didn't even hear about them until Friday night, I say, resisting the urge to look at Schmidt. I keep hearing about these damned documents, but no one seems to have provided me with copies of them, and I want to remind this board that it has yet to formally charge me. The goal is to avoid that, Jake, Christie states the obvious. And my intention is to avoid it. Do you have these documents? Christie looked at Tom, and then at me. We have the original affidavit, but only copies of the photos. I want copies of this and that. Scratch that. I want the originals of what you have. You can copy them if you want. Jake, we won't turn over the original affidavit, and for confidentiality reasons, we won't turn over the photos. If we need a formal review by the HR supervisor on Wednesday, we'll show you the documents. Keep the pictures. I know they're fake anyway, but I want the original affidavit. Jake, we can't do that, Christie replies. If I am not given the opportunity to examine the original evidence to prove that it was not falsified, you will only strengthen my claim for wrongful termination. I need that original, and I need time, at least until the end of the week, I add with emphasis. I'm sure you already have multiple copies of all the documents, and if the affidavit is valid, what am I supposed to do? Destroy it? You could just reprint the affidavit and re-sign it. Jake, could you give us a moment to discuss this? Asked Christy. Of course, I reply, rising slowly from my chair, and I'm sure Schmidt didn't miss it. And Miss Evans, I add. Christy tilts her head inquisitively, as she always does when I want to get a point across. Trust your judgment and your experience, I declare, and leaving the severance package on the table, turn and walk out of the room. I close the door and lean against it. I can hear talking and arguing. Hinckley and Schmidt are clearly on the same side. Schmidt is the clear adversary, but I've never had a problem with Hinckley, so why has she become such a burr in my ass now? Tom is on my side, and Rolansky seems to agree with him. They argue that the extra week will do no harm, and moreover, will avoid even more legal problems with the wrongful termination lawsuit. Hinckley and Schmidt argue that the company could receive a sexual harassment lawsuit at any time, and failure to act promptly could show that the company condones such actions. They argue that the company has followed procedure so far, and there is no reason not to continue. They are also adamant against providing me with any documents, even copies of them. They said that the documents can be provided to me during the official verification by the HR manager. I could hear both sides talking over each other. I realized that Tom's choice of Rolansky was a good one for me. The only voice I didn't hear was Christie's. Then for the next minute, I hear only the soft tones of Christie's voice. I smile to myself. In her role as a counselor, she is proving herself to be at her best. I hear silence, and then footsteps. I manage to back away from the door so I don't fall when Tom opens the door and asks me to step back. I close the door behind me and walk over to the desk. Christy seems to have taken control, waving for me to sit back in my chair. I smile and explain that I prefer to stand, preferring not to explain why. Jake, we have a counteroffer. I need time at least until the end of the week. Would you please listen to me? I nod. We ask that you take your severance package with you and give it serious consideration. We ask that you return on Wednesday at noon to give us your answer. At this time, you are not terminated. We have not initiated a formal termination review. Depending on your response on Wednesday, we may decide to formally begin that process. In the meantime, we have decided to place you on administrative leave. Unless we ask you to be present, you are not to be on company property or have access to any documents, whether paper or electronic. Except, she pauses, we'll give you the original affidavit, but not pictures. Obviously, we expect them to be returned. If need be, you'll see a copy of the pictures on Wednesday. Here comes the end of the third installment, and the mysteries haven't gotten any less. Schmidt wants to get into Jake's post. Christy suddenly takes Jake's side. In general, you are still waiting for the sequel, which will be released very soon. And if you want to read the released chapters without censorship,